All right. We didn't actually have anything specific in the agenda today, so I've pulled the first item from the backlog, which is GE around off policy V1 beta 2. Do you want to go for that?
Yeah, sure. So, quick status update on where we are right now. We first identified the big chunks of changes we need to do for auth policy v2, either in Arduino side or in the Quadrant operator side. And we basically we did them in Arduino. We have 2 open pull requests that the only reason why they have not been merged is because one of them is still missing a thumbs up there, or maybe not. And they need to be merged together. So one in the Arduino repo, and another one in the Arduino operator. And those PRs are basically introducing the new version of the alt-config API, which requires now the deployment of conversion webhook, as I explained in previous meetings. So those 2 PRs achieve that. And maybe I think now we are ready to get them merged. And with that, possibly cut a release of Arduino. Then we have the changes on the Quadrant operator side. Basically, we need to bump the version of Arduino that the auth policy CRD depends upon. So currently it depends on, obviously, auth config v1 beta 1. So we need to import the new types based on v1 beta 2, right? And with that, fix all the reconciliation of the auth policy now with the new type. And that is because the definition of the auth policy, the part of that we call the auth scheme, is basically a copy of the Arduino auth config. So I already sent a draft pull request that also does that, and in the in fact, I could paste the links of those pull requests here in the document. This one in Arduino, ready to be merged. This one, and I'm pasting this to the doc now. This one in the Arduino operator also ready, and this is a draft. So this is ready. This is a draft only because it's importing types that are defined in this other pull request here. But once these ones are merged, this should be ready for review. Maybe just add some tests there, and we are ready. And there's yet another big chunk of changes that I have only locally that introduces the so-called route selectors to the API, right? The same thing we did for the rate limit policy V2, we're doing for the auth policy one. Effectively, that field that allows a user to express which, or selectors for which HP route rules that should activate or trigger that particular policy. And with that, I think we got almost all of the big chunks needed for achieving auth policy v2. But throughout this process, we also spotted some minor ones, and in some cases, perhaps not so minor. And I would like to very quickly run through those here. So the first one is this one that shows up second in the bullet points here on my list, which is the well-known attributes implemented in Arduino. That is something we mentioned at some point, but we end up forgetting, and currently there is no issue tracking for that. If you are familiar with the introduced or proposed well-known attributes that we implemented for rate limit policy v2, the idea was that we would also implement those for the auth policy, right? And if I very quickly may share my screen, I think it's easier to show here what's at stake. So this is the RFC for well-known attributes, right? So basically where we are defining that set of attributes that users can specify in specific fields of the rate limit policy, and ideally also in the auth policy, to refer to some dynamic data of the request for which we are enforcing the policy, right? So we have attributes that relate to the request itself, such as the HTTP request being handled, such as the host name, path, etc., right? And other categories of attributes here as well. Currently, most of these attributes are already exist in Autorino, right? It's part of the pre-existing selectors in Autorino, except that they exist with a different name, right, in Autorino. A name that is determined by the structure of the external authorization request that the proxy sends to Autorino based on the Envoy external authorization protocol. So what you see here that says request.id in Autorino is slightly different, right? It's actually context.request.hp.id, and similarly for other attributes here. So in order to achieve consistency with the rate limit policy, we also would like to implement the same set of well-known attributes in Autorino as well, right? So this is one thing that we could live without, but it would be nice to have. So the same set of attributes that you could add in a selector in a rate limit policy would also work for a not policy, right? Instead of this slightly different name for the attribute. So this is one thing that we are missing. Yes?
Yeah, just wondering, why did we call this well-known attributes? Well-known by whom?
Well known by whoever refers to this RFC in the Kuadrant architecture repo here, right? But also because these attributes, they are based on another set defined by Envoy itself. So Envoy defines what it calls its well-known attributes, and they match almost one-to-one with what we see here, right? And it was our starting point for defining our own. Maybe in the future, we may want to add some others on top of these, like abstractions that make things easier for users to represent specific data, make reference to specific data. But as of today, they're basically the same thing as we got from the Envoy set.
Thanks.
And by the way, it's a detail, but an important one. We went with this one rather than using the already existing attributes in Autorino, because these attributes happen to be the same attributes that a WAS module in Envoy can use to request the corresponding data to the underlying WAS environment, right, through the API. So in the case of our WAS machine, we can request, for example, this data of the host name, right, by using this attribute name. Yes, Alex.
Sorry, just to be very clear, everything Guy said is correct in an Envoy environment. This is not part of the WASM proxy WASM spec, right? The only thing that's part of the API is how you get to, you query them, but the names and their types, and none of that is specified anywhere.
Yeah, correct. Yes, effectively what we're doing today in the WASM machine is we're using the API's function get property, and for the value of the property we request, we put this attribute name here.
Right. So somebody working in, already, like being used to work with Envoy, would have a nice time. With Kuadrant. Is that the idea? Or?
Sure, that's one of the ideas. Yeah, make it familiar for people who already know this API of Envoy. Don't know how big of a group that is, but also because it makes things easier for us to implement, right? Also, it gives us some reference for free. And Envoy, as of today, happens to be our only environment where we are requesting this kind of data, right? So I think it only made sense. Right? The other option, without changing much, would be replicating Autorino names for these attributes into the WASM machine for the rate limit policy, right? Meaning using the same attribute names we have for auth in rate limiting, which felt more weird, I think. So I think this is better, and that would also mean we would need to specify our own set of attributes with their own names, completely or almost completely decoupled from Envoy. Anyway, so I don't want to get back to this decision, right? This is an RFC, it's there. I recommend checking out if you're interested. The important point here is that we did not implement this in Altarina yet. So Altarina continues to refer to that data to its current name, right? Which is basically a path to navigate the external authorization request. Yes.
So just to be clear about what the state is, what the state of things is, or the rate limiting policy. Currently, in the WASM scheme, you can only get 2 string typed things. So not trying to hijack but my perspective on this is, I think for now, if that's not part of it, it's sad, but it's not the end of the world, because we're still, I just revived the work as of yesterday on this PR that I started weeks ago, I think, in the meantime. But so we can fold that into this release, but I would certainly want to see that for whatever the release is that supports Gateway API 1.0. So I think we should give this priority, whether it should be part of this or not. I'll leave others to answer, but for the case of rate limiting, there is more work in the pipes as well.
Yep, thanks, Alex. Right, so moving on here, another topic to discuss here related to Alt v2 is whether to bring Alt to the WASM scheme again or not, right? We raised this a few times in the past, but we might finally be hitting the limits of what we can do in an ISO authorization policy CRD, right? To be more concrete, we want to be able to inject info about which specific route triggered the call to the external authorization. Pretty much the same issue we had with the rate limit API and Envoy in the past, and the reason why we went with the WASM scheme in the first place. Now we may need that for all as well, right? And the reason for that is, maybe I can show that with a quick demo here of what we have. By the way, if you can still see my screen, I have here deployed Kuadrant, the Kuadrant service protection, with all the changes for that I currently have for Alt Policy v2, including what I have done for the reconciliation of the route selectors. Okay, so I have here a HTTP route that looks like this. So specify one host name, is the Istio ingress gateway as the parent gateway. It has 2 HTTP route rules, right? One with 2 matches for get/cause or get/dols, right? Star, and another one for /admin star. Okay, and I can create a Alt policy trivial one, only so you can see how it looks like. So this is an Alt policy that does not specify any rules, right? Any Alt rules. It just targets the HTTP route. So it's kind of pointless, but only to show that this is how the ISO authorization policy looks like. So it creates an ISO authorization policy resource today with the rules that you get from the HTTP route, right? So, and the important thing to notice here is that in the ISO authorization policy, you can effectively implement disjunction logics here, right? So this is these rules are OR together. So it's either a request is sent to get/car star or get/dols and etc. Right? And keep that in mind. And the alt config looks like this. It's nothing special, just hosts, right? If we create a slightly more complex alt config that adds here at least one rule, authentication rule in this case, right? for API key authentication. Does not specify any root selectors yet, so shouldn't expect much for the not much different, nothing different for those two resources, the rules or the conditions that trigger the external authorization. Same thing in the authorization policy and the auth config. Also, no conditions here, only the authentication auth rule added here, right? Things start becoming interesting when we start defining some route selectors. So in the auth policy v2, I'm proposing here a route selectors either at the level or actually both. Could be at the level of the top level of the auth policy, right? So basically conditions to enforce this auth policy altogether or skip it. But also route selectors that you could specify at the level of each individual auth rule here, which relates more one-to-one with what we have for the rate limit policy, right? So if we create this, an auth policy, nothing changes here because, let's see. Actually, this should be different. Something's, yeah, this should only contain admin. Should only send to the external authorization when admin. And for the auth config, it creates a when condition, an authoring a when condition like this. So this starts, you start seeing the well-known attributes here, right? Except that these are not the well-known, but the authoring ones. So by implementing well-known attributes, one thing that would differ here would be, instead of seeing context, request, HTTP, path, maybe you would see the well-known one, version of one, right? Like request.path instead. Because in the Envoy external authorization, path includes also the query string. In Authorino, we need to extract. So there's this special function we use in Authorino to basically split and extract one of the parts of that it got here from the path. And we need to use regex, right, to match here due to the set of operator supported in Authorino. So a couple of things that could change here if we had support for the well-known attributes in Authorino. Yes. So yeah, I can see you the chat. So if you want to say something, just go ahead. No problem.
It was just me couldn't talk back then. I was just saying +1 for consistency across the attribute naming. You know, the ideal case is somebody learns something in one area and then can apply it or take an educated guess and get it right in a different area. So depending on the impact in other areas and schedule, which you guys will no doubt talk about, I would certainly vote for that.
Absolutely. Even though in this particular case, this condition was not written by the user, right? It was created by the auth policy controller, but still, one who reads this would not immediately recognize that it refers to the same thing as the path as in the well-known attributes. But also because the when conditions could be added here to the auth policy itself, and Authorino would merge them together with the ones it creates based on the route selectors. So yes, totally agree, right? We're almost getting to the point about the why there wasn't shim here, right? If I create yet another auth policy here that instead of specifying route selectors at the top level, defines route selectors at the level of each individual auth rule, right? Let's say, for example, for authentication, we want to select that HP route rule that matches /admin star, right? And when effectively requiring API key authentication for all the requests sent to /admin star, right? For all the others, and there is only one other HTTP route rule in that HP route, the one for get/cars or get/dolls, and that is one single rule because we do not have support for or the OR operator, logical operator in Arduino, in the Arduino conditions, if we select that other HP route rule, maybe you already can guess what will happen. The controller, as of today, right, and you can't see that anywhere because these are only local changes here. I haven't pushed this branch yet. The controller will go to the HP route, select the HP route rule because the selector is valid for this other rule here that basically gives anonymous access for the other rule. It will basically write two conditions, but they are ANDed together. So getting back, let me show this in practice. So this is the auth config that it creates, right? So it has one authentication rule that enforces API key on all the requests whose path matches /admin star, and this was generated out of the route selector. And for the other route selector, it selected one HP route that has two matches, but because we don't have OR operator here, this won't ever match, right? It's impossible to get method equals to get and path matching /car star, and at the same time, path matching /dolls star, obviously, right? So what are our options here? So either we bring auth to the WASP machine and make possible to the WASP machine to inject more data to Arduino that Arduino can use to write the conditions, right? Actually, the auth policy controller can write smarter conditions there in Arduino, or we need to implement the logical disjunction in Arduino, right? So this is me raising yet another thing we may have to do in Arduino for the auth policy, right? Or in the WASP machine.
You have a preference?
Well, we managed to live in limited OR without OR conditions, right? But because we have the WASP machine that basically specifies a list of all the limits that we want to activate. The same thing could happen for auth, right? So we could use the same logic we already have for rate limiting, also for auth, where we first evaluate all the conditions and we select all the auth rules that needed to be activated, and then we pass that to Arduino, a list of all the rules that need to be activated. So we wouldn't need to implement OR. So I think it's good for us, right? If we bring it to the WASP machine, we can reuse logics we already have for rate limiting. But if you think on the users, right, and especially users of Arduino standalone, I think it would probably be well received, the web operator for the condition there, considering all the kind of things you can do in Arduino, right? So I don't know. I think for the moment we are right now, it would make sense to start working on the WASP machine. But I wouldn't close the door for also have it the logical disjunction in Arduino as well at some point.
Would it make us easier? How do I say this? Like if we choose to implement another gateway API implementation, would that be easier if it was going through WASM? Would it disattach us more from Istio?
It's a good point. Yes, I think so, because Istio's implementation of external authorization based on the Istio authorization policy CID, it's kind of not very, it's not straightforward for one who knows the Envoy external authorization API, right? Because actually what Istio does, it's a combination of different filters of Envoy that allows Istio to avoid dealing with all the burden of implementing the per route part of Envoy external authorization. So Istio can trigger external authorization based on per route. Let's put it this way, right? Based on patterns of HP attributes. but it does not use external authorization per route config to do that. Rather, it's kind of a trick. It does combining the Envoy RBAC filter with some shadow rules that actually do not block the request, but only flags some of the RBAC route. And then he uses that to decide whether to call external authorization or not. It's an implementation detail of Istio, but that allow them to skip, the per route config of external authorization API, which is effectively where Envoy has what's called the context extensions field, meaning you can add more information than what Istio provides in the external authorization request, but only by implementing Envoy per route external authorization. So you would find there the context extension field. And that would be the way to hint Authorino more about what would effectively trigger the request, and then allow us to write smaller auth rules in the auth config, in the Authorino auth config. So to sum up, and effectively answer your question, yes, if it's not based on auth policy in that weird trick that Istio does of combining RBAC filter and external authorization one, maybe something that fully implements Envoy external authorization, including per route configs, I suppose we would get likely context extension. Something, by the way, I already pinged Istio about, but it's a no-go, right? It's very complicated for them to support full external authorization per route. I even opened an issue in the Istio repo for supporting something that would be kind of halfway in between per route config and what they currently have, but that could suffice for hinting our external authorization service about what would trigger the request, but they closed the issue without any activity, basically. They said, oh, no, we cannot predict this, and they just close it. Yes.
So I kind of wanted to work through the first one here, the missing well-known attributes, and then maybe, because I feel like I'm losing context on the previous one, there's so much information coming into my brain right now.
Right.
So with the well-known attributes, what's the context of time here? Is this like as part of MVP release, or is this post MVP release? Is that what we're trying to decide?
I think it would be nice to have it for MVP. So we wouldn't release anything that says, hey, this is how you write this attribute for rate limiting, but the same thing, you would have to write it differently for all. So
Yeah.
it would be nice to have it for MVP. I wouldn't say that's too much work to get done. It only probably postpones a little bit the release of Authorino itself, which no big deal.
Okay. So for consistency, like Andrew said, I think it makes sense. If we don't feel like it's going to take weeks and weeks to get it done, then it seems like a reasonable thing to try and get done. So I guess that's the well-known attributes, right? Unless somebody feels strongly different.
Yes, that's a well-known attribute, and I guess just a few days of work, less than a week probably, right? It's not too much, and I can I'll be more than happy than of sharing my ideas of how to implement this in Authorino with anyone interested in helping me with this. But besides that, we also have how to support those or conditions so in the auth config, right?
This is a more contentious one for me, I think. I'm wondering, there's kind of two thoughts in my head. One is, could we document our way around this for now and say, if you need to do something like this, then you can create like 2 routes with 2 auth policies and off you go, right? That's the way it's going to work for now. Because I know that post MVP, we've talked fairly frequently about auth moving into the WASM anyway, right?
Let me tell you where this bit me, right? So maybe that helps. We decide on whether there is indeed a workaround or not, right? I first thought that unlike rate limiting, that you cannot duplicate the definitions of your limits, right? Because they effectively mean different limit definitions and therefore different counters, right? In auth, to an extent, you can duplicate your auth rules, right? And trigger, let's say, copy number 1 of your auth rule if condition 1 matches, and copy number 2 of the same auth rule if condition 2 matches, right? But only to an extent, right? There are some cases that you cannot, right? And especially now, and that is the part that I missed personally, especially now that we moved from a list of auth rules to a map, a named map of auth rules, right? How do you duplicate something where the name is supposed to be a unique identifier, right? You cannot add another entry to the map with the same name. And if you have like other auth rules that refer to that previous auth rule by the name, so you cannot choose a different name either. Hopefully some people are following what I'm describing here. So I thought we would be able to duplicate the auth rules because we don't have the same problem as in rate limiting when we duplicate rate limit definitions. But because of changing the data structure, it's actually not possible, right? So we cannot really tell users, hey, just create another HP route with another set of matches, and then you create another. I mean, we can, but that would increase complexity of the auth policy significantly, because they would need to write any other upcoming or following auth rule that depends on this previous one, also with the condition, depending which one matched first. Right? For example, let's say you want one authentication method if it's get X, and another authentication method if it's get Y, right? But that happens to be the same HP route rule in the HP route, right? So it's a NOR. It's either one thing or the other, right? Sorry, that is not a good example. You want the same authentication method for both cases, /X or /Y, right? If you write two different authentication rules that effectively are copies of each other, and then you have an authorization rule that reads that authentication, the result of that authentication step, now you have two different authentication configs with two different names. So in authorization policy, you also need to write a condition to check which one matched before. I can write some examples of what I'm describing here if it helps, but I don't think it's going to be possible, just to work around.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to grasp just from words.
Between I have to say, between bringing auth to the WASM shim, or just adding the logical disjunction in Authorino, my guess is that this alternative is less work, right? Even though we will not, I said before, we can reuse logics we already have for rate limiting, but in Authorino, it would be a minor change in the API and in the implementation to support a NOR operator, right? So we could do that. So I think it's probably easier than writing the whole thing for all in the WASM shim, including the request to external authorization and everything.
Okay. So my concern, I guess, Guy, is like all of this is landing mostly on your plate, and there's only one of you.
Right. So actually, I think I kind of needed all all the work I did so far, even to realize, these is actually the set of requirements we have to move forward, right? So it's not like we had all this clear a couple of weeks ago. So I think this is basically me raising the issue now, so we can plan better for the next steps from here, right? Maybe somebody can help me with implementation of well-known attributes in Arduino. Somebody else can help me with the logical disjunction for the conditions and so on, right? While I continue with the route selectors implementation.
Yeah, I would tend to say, you know, we should maybe actually put a date somewhere for the MVP for like, okay, if it goes over that date, it just doesn't make the MVP. I don't think any of this is actually blocking, because given that even the rate limiting side, the well-known attributes are not fully worked out, it would be nice, but I don't think it's blocking. But anyway, I would, yes, let's try to have that in. But the whole WASM shim conversation, I think we should not try to get that in the MVP at all. We should make that decision based on a broader set of, like I was talking about before, like it might in fact affect how easy we could make Kuadrant work with Envoy Gateway. So we should take those things into account as well and make the decision correctly. I think not quickly fix it. My 2 cents.
Yeah, just my concern too is that it sort of drags on. And these are all valid things, Guy. I guess like the sort of counterpoint to that is if we go with something that doesn't have these things in it, then are we technically going to break the API when we introduce them? Maybe. It is a beta API, so we're sort of allowed to do it. We're sort of allowed to break things.
Yeah, I think I know where we're heading, and I think that there's a chance of going without all this, and yet having this in the future without breaking the API per se, because the well-known attributes, they are part of the API, but at the same time they aren't, right? They are not part of the CRD definition, right? So they're not in the CRD. They are a string field that you can write whatever. So we could effectively break the existing CRs, right, and require a migration of the CRs, but not because of the API, the old policy CRD changed it, but because now we are referring to the well-known attributes by a different name. But we could also make it backwards compatible, right? We can implement with the well-known attributes, but still support the previous Arduino attributes ones, right? So I think for the well-known attributes, I don't see an issue with that. And for the other one that has to do with triggering things conditionally, probably we would present this as a limitation, right? Something, it only works for quite straightforward rules that it's not either this or that set of HP attributes, but it's for all of them, right? And then later, the API will be there already, and once we have the OR thing figured out one way or the other, it would just out of the box start working for users.
I mean, so you saying those things, they sound extremely reasonable trade-offs right now, right? Like, when I think about like DNS policy, for instance, right? DNS policy targets gateway, it targets all the listeners in that gateway. You can't. There's no way for you to select one or the other, right? It's a limitation, but we're okay with that. We can we can add that feature in later. So, without being an expert on this, it feels like this is a limitation that we could say the limitation that this currently has is X, Y, and Z. So you can cope with these use cases, but not these use cases, and in the future we're going to improve that.
Right.
So if a user came after we did this release and said, "Oh, I can't do X and Y," our answer could be, "Here's an issue. We're working on that in the near future."
Yeah, well, sounds reasonable to me. Yeah.
So the only thing that sort of still tripped me up here is that well-known attributes, because it is like you're saying it's not part of the API, but I also feel like if I use them and then you change them under the surface, like I'm gonna want you to like translate those for me, right? That's like that feels like a bad thing.
Yeah, I have to say, translating from Arduino ones to well-known ones is not trivial though, not because it's a different set, because effectively it's the same set of attributes, but because of the modifiers that Arduino supports, right? I can get to, go into the detail some other time. But a tool that translates those automatically may have some edge cases. For example, the one that I showed before, that you extract a portion of the path, right? That is a string modifier that we support in Authorino. So finding the exact well-known attribute that you need to replace, right, with the new version, without messing up with that or with those other bits, right, can be tricky. So I would probably go with keeping it backwards compatible rather than some tool that rewrite that.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think somebody raised his hand.
Alex raised his hand there for a second.
Yeah, it was me, but I think you summarized it the way that I wanted to summarize it. So nothing to add.
All right. So to finish here, I would just skip this of the top level conditions. This is a very minor one and not so important. But there's yet another issue to consider, even though I think if we already discussed about WASP machine versus or operator in Authorino and the whole thing with the limitations with each authorization policy CRD, this is kind of would be easy to grasp, right? It has to do with how Authorino looks up for the auth configs, right? To the people familiar with that mechanism, Authorino by default uses the host name of the request being handled by the gateway to look up to index and later look up for an auth config, right? As I said, it's by default, right? You can override that. You can change it. Instead of using the host name, you can effectively index an auth config for whatever string that you want, right? And in the auth config, there's a field that says host, but actually it's lookup keys. You can put whatever you want there. As long as in the external authorization request, you provide a special information that says that you are overwriting the host name, right? So instead of using the host name, use this string here to look up, right, on a per request basis. But again, the problem is that Istio does not expose that. So Istio does not expose the context extension thing. So that leads to an issue which is better described in this sentence here, right? If you have two auth policies that target two HP routes that happen to specify or inherit the same set of host names, because of the host name collision prevention thing in Authorino, one of the auth policy will be considered valid and the other one will be rejected by order of creation, right? While that might be a valid use case, if you think about it, right? You can have two auth HP routes that do not specify host names, but they basically inherit from the gateway, and they only differ on the HP route rules, right? The matching rules. And if we have such case and we create two auth policies equal and targeting one of those HP routes, we will have this problem that one of the auth configs is accepted, the other one is rejected because the host name is taken already, and therefore the auth policy will not be ready, right? So the way to solve this problem is by making Authorino to override the host name as the index key for the auth config, something that we can only do if we have control over the context extension thing, right? Or not only, that would be the most reasonable option in my opinion, right? And therefore, by bringing auth to the WASP machine again, right? Or getting Istio to support it, which I don't think it's likely. Or yet, we probably bigger of a change, redesigning the way Authorino looks up for an auth config, right? Which I would probably argue against. Only so you know. So these are things we need to address, and kind of, in my opinion, it's all pointing to sooner than later we having to bring auth to the WASP machine. We can live without it for a while, maybe by implementing the logical disjunction for the conditions in Authorino. that will buy us some time. And then we say, yeah, if you have 2 HP routes, and they should specify different host names, right? And as a limitation. And then only when we are ready to bring it all to the WASM shim, we can finally solve all these issues here altogether.
Yeah. So my instinct here is to do the well-known attributes because I feel like it is public-facing API, and if we feel like we could do that in a couple of days, that seems worth it, because I would worry that if we left it there, then we basically end up leaving it there forever and having to maintain it, or at least depreciate it over a period of releases and then remove it. So I would say do that. The other ones, so auth WASM shim, I think is post MVP. I think the OR is post MVP, and I think the host name collisions is post MVP as well. And we just call those out as limitations of the current auth policy. None of adding these things post MVP is not going to break any compatibility. It's just going to improve the functionality that we're already providing and solve more and more use cases. So I don't necessarily see this as something that we have to do right now. That's my thoughts on it from what you've described, Guy.
Okay.
Shout if anyone disagrees. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there should be some tasks to document the limitations as well, just to call them out clearly. And I would even go as far as saying the current implementation of rate limit policy does. Sorry, my phone is ringing in my ears. The current implementation of rate limit auth policy doesn't support these types of use cases. However, coming iterations are planned to support them. Do you know, something like that?
Okay, yeah, I'll make sure to do that.
Okay. Thanks for all the detail, Guy. It was really useful. I do tend to get a little bit lost in the detail and the weeds sometimes, but it's good to understand what limitations we're accepting, what trade-offs we're making at this point.
Yep, sure.
Do we have anything else on this one before we move on?
Nope, nothing on this one.
Okay. Wow, that actually took a while. We only have 10 minutes. So Kevin, my one's going to take longer than 10 minutes. So I was going to maybe, Kevin, does yours a short one here?
Yeah, I think mine's probably going to be short. So I could do mine, yes.
Cool. For it.
Cool. Yeah, I guess this one is, yeah, I guess there was some discussion on kind of our side on this one. So basically, I think one of the tree scale QE guys has suggested to allow for like setting the used limiter image via the limited or CRD kind of spec. It can actually be already kind of be done to like set the image via this kind of related image limiter or envar. I think the idea is like for like OLM installations, this envar gets passed to like the operator deployments via the kind of subscription config. There's some concerns I think Alex kind of mentioned. I guess the con for this is like, I think the main use case for this is kind of for kind of dev or testing, and a user could just set this in the spec. And when they do that, the limiter operator could actually like break the limiter, like limited or installation, because limited or operator kind of creates the expected like limits file that the limited or version expects. So just say if this kind of limits file kind of change, if we either upgrade the limiter operator or like the version of the limiter, the image is kind of out of date, then the installation could actually like stop working.
So, just so I understand, Kevin, is it the case that the limiter operator is responsible for the limits file, and if that API changed based on a new version of the image or an older version of the image, you could break your limiter instance because the limits file would be in the wrong state?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so I would say with this one, what we've done in the past is we are okay to allow it, but it's not something that is then supported afterwards, if you know what I mean. So like you do so at your own risk. Because we have no control over what image they choose to use. They could build their own one. so yeah. I would say it's fine to support it, just it's at your own risk to change it. Alex?
Yeah, so I agree. On what's been said, that being said, I think specifying in the CRD makes for a weird contract then, right? You're like, oh, you can do that, but that one, if you use, then if it breaks, it's your, like, how do I know what I can safely do and what I think it blurs the contract with the user.
Yeah.
So I find this personally kind of a bit shitty. That being said, the one thing I love about it being in the CRD is that then we can easily see it, unlike the stuff in an environment, which is the reason why I hate environment variables. I don't think they should be used to do anything. So yeah, so I'm a bit of a mixed boat. That being said, given Authorino does it, then maybe we should just do it. Maybe we should name it as in you're on your own dash image
like
thing or whatever.
Experimental image ref.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's I don't know, maybe there's something that can be done on the naming or whatever. Again, I think, yeah, I know. Well, I know. I still, so it goes just said like all of the controllers do. But you know, that's kind of the argument. We always have done it, so it's fine. So I don't think it's great. I think having a good, clear API to what the user can expect of what it can do, it can't do, I think it's nice. Maybe we should integrate all that into our upper level. I don't know, experimental or on your own, or don't you fuck around with this. Oops, sorry, recorded.
QB Dragons.
Yeah, exactly, right? How do we best do that? I don't know. But I think making it clear for the user what to get into is good goal to have. Sorry, Gus, you meant to add something.
I think I completely agree with what you said, and that's why the use of the image in the CR is totally unsupported. Because you can break not only the limits file, you can only break the deployment. Maybe the operator is adding some common flags in the deployment, and the limiter image doesn't support those or some way. So yeah,
that's before you even get into upgrading.
Yeah, exactly, and even exactly, and if you set the image, the upgrade procedure is broken, because when you upgrade the operator needs to respect the image and is not upgraded. So yeah, it's totally meant for dev, testing, support, whatever. And last thing I wanted to say is, I was discussing with Kevin this earlier. Environment variables can be used as well for customizing the image of limitador in this particular case. But the environment variables are clusters, are for the whole operator. So all the instances of limitador uses the same operator. The operator is a single cluster-wide cluster scope. So for the use case, or again for testing, that you want different instances of limitador CR with different images, the CR, the image in the CR is where you can use this. So single operator, multiple instances, each instance with a different limitador image, if it's necessary for, again, dev, testing, support. pieces.
I'll be
For
honest,
production, it's not being used or not being recommended. Just to be clear.
To be honest, I'm not a big fan of putting it into the CRD. I see that use case that you just highlighted there, but it feels like the CRD is your user contract, and so you should support like what's in that. I don't know. I kind of wonder maybe if there's a better option, like a config map that you could create. That if you're a developer, you create that config map, you set it to be read, an override, or something
agree.
something that's not in the CRD.
Annotation or something that is not in the CRD. Totally agree. Yeah. Could be. Yeah.
So I'm with you, Greg. Like I would love an alternative, and one that's then quadrant wide, right? So sorry again to be praising the entire RFC thing, but I think that's something like it would be nice that we decide as a group on what is the way to extend use cases into unsupported land, right? In a way that plays neatly with upgrading subscriptions and all that stuff. All the bells and whistles that we're trying to support with our stack. So I'm unsure how we best do that, but it would be really good to have agreement and have all of our components sort of play by those rules.
Yeah.
That would be my ask.
Yep. So I think then that what seems to be emerging is we don't want to put this into the CRD. Just because it's in another one doesn't mean it should go into this one. And that we have an RFC for how to apply developer configuration, not via the CRD. And then we look to implement that in our other components is what seems to be the right way forward here. Like, this isn't urgent, right? This isn't like, oh my God, we need to do this next week. Right. So Kevin, do you want to take some ownership over putting together an RFC for that?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I could do that.
Guy, sorry, go ahead.
Well, maybe one reason to prioritize this is if we go the other way, right, where we decide not to expose in the API, we may want to remove it from Auth0 then.
Is Auth0 the only one exposing it in the CRD, or is there others?
Others.
Oh boy.
We're talking about limited operator, but the quadrant operator. No, not the quadrant. The quadrant operator. The quadrant CRD doesn't expose that. Doesn't expose that. But it's a common thing we've been doing for many years. But yeah, I agree with all said.
Okay. I mean, I don't think we need to expedite this for the sake of MVP. So, you know, if we end up with a new API version, that's fine. Like, it's kind of weird, right? We have this property that's an experimental thing that if you set, things are no longer supported in the CRD, and yet if we remove it, we have to have a new version of the CRD. It's a little bit funny, but I would say let's not get too bogged down in this right now and have an RFC for how we actually want to do it, and then we can deal with how we want to remove that property or document that property or whatever the case may be. All right, so Alex, that's a action on you. Not super high priority, but something that you can take on when you get a chance. All right, I think that's everything. So thanks very much, everybody. I'll talk to you next week.
Cheers.